All right, so I'm going to share my screen. That's probably going to be helpful. All right, so I know Raphael just went over how to get challenges and how to, sorry, I got to zoom everywhere, how to get your challenges started. So I'm going to go through that process again, just to get that repetition. And then we'll see how VS Code kind of works here. So to get to challenges, you might have noticed, so if you go to Quebec Platoon, the curriculum is what we look at. I would highly recommend bookmarking this because you're going to be referencing it pretty much every single day. So I have a bookmark for it right here, GitHub curriculum. Our curriculum is broken down into weeks, and each week we'll have 5 days, hopefully 5 days. So today is January 31st, last day of January. So if you click on that, that's today's material where Raphael went over a lot of this. We're talking about the command line. So again, there's some notes on here. Went over Git, so you can kind of see the commands that he talked about. What I'm going to go over is Visual Studio Code and just talk about setting it up. Again, nothing too difficult today. So let's get started with that. So for this example, I'm going to use a sample challenge I created. You're welcome to kind of code along with me. It's not a real challenge, but I created a challenge on our Quebec Platoon called Day 1 Example, just to have an example going. So again, just to review the steps that Raphael went over. So let's say I was going to do this challenge myself. First thing I want to do is fork. The reason you want to fork it is so you have access to it in your GitHub. You can clone it down straight from here. So it's Quebec Platoon. You have the ability to read from it, as in copying it down. You won't have the ability to write back to it because obviously we don't want you modifying our curriculum. So that's why we want to fork first. So if I go to fork, I'll select my personal GitHub. That will take, that was pretty quick actually. So these are the files we have. Most of our challenges should have a README, so it gives you kind of a good understanding of what you need to do. So always make sure you read the README to understand what your objectives are. Now that I've forked it over, I'm going to clone it down. So I'm going to copy this URL by clicking this button and then go to my terminal. So I have a terminal window here. Again, you guys can organize your files as you best see it, but I'd highly recommend creating like a code folder, maybe a folder for challenges, just so you have it organized instead of just having it all over your computer. But I've already created a code, Quebec, and challenges folder. So here I'm just going to do a git clone, clone, and then paste that URL that I just copied. That's not what I wanted to copy. Let me try that again. Copy that. All right. All right. So again, this is the URL for my Git repository on GitHub. I have git clone. If I hit enter, that will clone it down. So that cloned it down to Day 1 Example. So if I do an ls, notice I have Day 1 Example cloned down. Now you do have the option to, change the folder names. If I did the same command, I could type, my challenge. This will specify that you want to copy this repository into this specific folder. So instead of defaulting to Day 1 Example, you can control what folder gets created into. But for most of the time, I don't need to do that, so I'm not going to do that. All right, so I have Day 1 Example. Delete. To get into it, cd Day 1. If you hit the tab key, I'm not sure if Raphael mentioned this, but if you hit the tab key, it's going to autofill. That's really handy, so you don't have to keep typing each folder. So in this case, I had only one folder in here. So once I start typing, DA and hit tab, it knows exactly what folder I'm referring to. So it just saves me some typing. So I'm going to hit enter there. The clear command will just kind of get all this stuff off my current window. It's still in my history. So if I still hit the arrow up command, these are all the commands that I just went through. So that's an easy way to go through your history. But all right, so now in my Day 1 Example folder, I'm going to hit code and period. If you set up things correctly with your VS Code, hitting this should bring up a VS Code editor. And there it is, kind of overflowing my screen here. All right, so VS Code should come up, and that's going to be defaulted to that directory that you're just in. All right, let's get to know VS Code a little bit, because we're going to be using it throughout the cohort. So this is Visual Studio Code. Here you can see all the files in your current workspace. So by default, VS Code wants you to have a workspace. You can create files and run them, but it's going to ask you to create a workspace. In this case, our Day 1 Example is our current workspace. Notice that we have a few files in there. This is what we cloned down. So we have a README file. We have a main.test.js file, which we'll look at, main.js. And we also have a Git folder. So some of you guys probably don't have this Git folder visible in VS Code. That's because it's a hidden folder. I think my settings will automatically showing hidden folders. So don't worry if you don't see the Git folder. Again, you're never going to need to modify that or touch anything in the Git folder. But you should have the files that we got from GitHub, right? So this project had 3 files, and I do have 3 files in the project. All right, so before we focus on this challenge, let's get your Visual Studio code, or sorry, VS Code set up. So if you go to the curriculum page, again, a lot of our material will be on the curriculum page. Let's go back to curriculum, day 1. All right, so if you scroll down to the VS Code section, and I highly recommend that you follow along so we can just do this together. We have some settings that we're going to recommend. Now, you might be thinking, well, I want to customize mine and do things a little differently. You do have the liberty to do so. You change these settings or apply some of them. But I'm going to highly recommend that we all use the same settings. That's because when we're working on like pair programming exercises or just looking at someone else's screen, it's going to be good that we all have the same and consistent workspace and like formatting for everything. So it's easier just to read someone else's code, work with someone else's machine, and whatever else it might be that you're doing as a class. So we're going to apply these settings to our VS Code. To do that, I'm going to go to my VS Code window that I brought up. There's a couple ways to do this. You can go to the code menu if you're on a Mac. Again, if you're on Windows, it might look a little different, but you should be able to follow along. Go to preferences and settings. All right, so if you get to the settings window, I'm going to click that. You'll see something like this, which is one way you can set your settings. So you can go through, these features like the window, new window, configure whatever you want to. But there's also kind of an easier way to just modify the settings that you want. So if you look at the top right corner where my mouse is kind of circling, there's this like icon that says like flip your sheet to a JSON mode. So right now you're looking at like the UI, the typical window interface. If I click this, it's going to change and I'm going to see something that looks like this. All right, these are the same settings, but we're just kind of editing them in a different format. So I'm actually just going to delete all these because they're probably a little different than what I want them to be. I'm going to copy everything I have on the curriculum page. All right, so I'm just going to copy that. And again, if I'm going too fast, let me know. But copy that, and I'm going to paste that into my settings.json. That looks really tiny, so. Nathan, you have a question?
Yeah, where was that option to flip it to a JSON package? I missed that part.
Sure. So if you're in your settings, there should be this icon up here that lets you flip it. It looks like a page with like an arrow turning it.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you.
So that's one way to get to it. Just another shortcut for VS Code. VS Code has tons of shortcuts. Also, please make sure you mute yourself if you are not. Thank you. Yeah, so another way you could get to this on a Mac, you could hit Command, Shift, and P. That should bring up this menu, and then you could search for settings here. And notice it has open settings in JSON. So it's going to open that, and again, you get to the same place. But here, again, I copied all these settings, so that's what I want to use by default. Probably looks a little tiny. Okay, let me just save this. So let's save that. All right. So again, these are the settings we're setting. Again, we're not going to go through all of them, but this is essentially what all of us should be using. Some items I want to mention that are kind of handy. Whereas autosave. So right now, by default, this is not enabled, but we've just set it so that anytime you move your focus off the current page, it's going to automatically save that file. Now, this might sound annoying, but it's actually going to be really helpful because you're going to be constantly shifting between the VS Code editor and the terminal. You just want it to save so that you're using the latest changes. Again, you can kind of go through this and kind of just understand what you set, but there's some tab size, font size, again, nothing too detailed going on here. All right, so once I have copy and pasted this, I'm going to hit Command S to save the settings, and then this should take an effect. So I should be using these settings for any files that I open. Any questions about that?
Oh, one question.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, thank you. The Windows zoom level, yours had 1 and our code thing says 0. Does that matter?
I think that's because I was trying to make it larger. So I think that might have just changed right
Okay,
here.
cool.
Yeah, it shouldn't matter. I think it's when I hit like commands. Yeah, so I'm trying to zoom in just to make it easier to read. I think that's what's adding in. But yeah, no, that should not matter. Thanks for asking.
Cool. Thank you.
So are these like absolutely, you need to have these settings?
Nope.
Because, okay, cool. Just
Yeah.
got a lot of stuff going on mine.
All right, yeah, these aren't absolutely necessary. Again, this is just to this is highly recommended so that all of us, we have 43 students here, we have TAs, we have instructors. All of us ideally should have the same setup so that it looks the same if I'm on, looking at Ivan's screen or looking at someone else's screen. It should be kind of consistent and we shouldn't have to deal with like weird formatting between our computers. But yeah, you don't need this to get anything kind of working. All right, so that's one thing. We just set our settings. We'll see those in effects shortly. Let's actually go back to the curriculum page. So that's the settings we set. One thing that makes VS Code really great are extensions. It's highly customizable. You can add a lot to it. So right out of the box, VS Code doesn't have all these extras in it, but it's really easy to get them in. So we have a few recommended extensions. Again, these aren't necessary to kind of do any development that we are going to do, but it's going to help you immensely. So for the most part, I'm just going to say definitely install these. So we're going to do these one by one. I already have them installed, but you guys can follow along here. So there's something called Beautify. In your VS Code on the left panel, there's a bunch of tabs you should see here. So the top one is the File Explorer, where you can see all your files that's in your workspace. If you go down to maybe like it should be the sixth, perhaps the sixth one, might be fifth. There should be something that looks like ice cubes coming together. That's the Extensions tab. So if you click that, you should be taken to a panel that shows you, installed. These are the extensions I've installed on in my VS Code. Most of you probably don't have many of these or any of them. But if you start searching for an extension like Beautify, right, it should find it. So I have something called Beautify. If you click on it, you get a good description of what it does. Again, you don't need to read through it. We're not installing viruses on your computer, but just understand these are going to make your development just easier to handle. All right, so if you do want more of a detail, again, all of these extensions should have a good detail page. But if you want to install it, you just need to click this tiny blue button that says install. You can also go to this page. If I wanted to uninstall it, I could click uninstall, and then I just uninstalled it. Now, if I want to reinstall it, just click install. All right, so that's Beautify. I'm just going to go through this list so you guys can jump ahead if you want to, but VS Code icons. Again, this is just for visual benefit. It has nothing to do with development. But right now, if you look at my icons right here, they have different icons based on the file type. So if I add a new file, called it like run.py, notice that my icon has changed to a Python logo. Again, it seems minimal, but it's really, really beneficial when you have like a large project with tons of files. Kind of easy just to visually see what types of files you have rather than reading the file extension. Again, minor, but I really find it beneficial. So maybe you will too. Get rid of this file. Okay, so that's what VS Code icons are going to do. So if you go here, again, search for VS Code icons. That's what it was called. VS Code icons. Yep, that's what I've installed. So that's another extension. So again, all these are just configurations you're adding. You can find a ton more. So again, there's probably hundreds, maybe thousands of extensions that you can install. You might find some cool ones that might help you. So you are not limited just to these. Bracket pair polarizer, I use this one a lot, again, in my development. What this does is when you're typing, so if I go back to my code files, as you're typing, I added a bracket right here. It's going to match those kind of in pairs. So notice that these brackets are pink versus these are yellow. That just makes it easier to understand what level, what scope you're in. So now I know that this pink bracket matches with this bracket instead of matching with this yellow one. Now, obviously, your tabbing, your code formatting should play a big role in identifying what scope you're in. But if I keep adding more brackets, well, this scope is here, and I just know that by looking at the color of the icon. Again, this is totally optional, but I like seeing kind of the matching brackets in color. Okay, let's just kind of keep it going. Hopefully, you guys are following along. Any questions with these extensions? Path and Intellisense. I'm not entirely sure what this does. I know Intellisense is just aid for developers to kind of suggest what functions or variables you might want to use. Let's see what this does. Yep, auto completes file names. So this again just makes your life easier. Don't want it, you don't need to download it, but highly recommend it. Live server. This is one of my favorite ones just because it makes looking at HTML files really easy. So if I go back to extensions, search for live server. Again, most of these should be pretty quick to install. So kind of zooming along here, but Live Server lets you view HTML files pretty easily. And as you make changes to your HTML file, it'll update the page. That's kind of nice. By default, that a browser would not do that. All right, a few more. Python. This will make your development in Python easier. So if you Intellisense for Python, again, just makes it easier to understand and autofill things you're working on. Okay, the last two we're not going to really see today, but we're going to be doing something called pair programming twice a week. You guys are going to be getting to groups on Tuesday evenings or Tuesday afternoons and Thursday afternoons. We're going to go over pair programming tomorrow, so we might try to demo one of these tools. But obviously, most of us are in a virtual setting. LiveShare makes it sort of simpler to kind of work on the same window together, even though it might be 100 miles apart. So definitely install these two because you may use it. Again, you don't have to use it, but LiveShare, it's kind of cool to use. We'll demo it tomorrow morning when we're working on a challenge. But make sure you install LiveShare and I guess LiveShare audio if you want to use VS Code to kind of chat. I mean, you don't have to. We use Slack primarily for most of our communication. So you don't have to have these. All right, as I said, hundreds of other extensions you can add. Google cool ones. I'm sure there's a lot of cool ones out there that I've not discovered. But yeah, if you find a cool one, maybe recommend it to the class. But otherwise, yeah, this is what again makes VS Code really cool is that you can customize it, benefit off of someone else's development, and get kind of their cool features into your VS Code. Any questions about extensions? All right, I'm going to assume that you guys either got through this list or can get through this list on your own. But again, these are just recommend ones that we recommend, but there's tons more you can add. All right, so let's talk about VS Code. So again, we talked about the side panel here. So we have our file explorer. We talked about extensions. There's also a search, and I'm sure you guys have searched plenty of times. This will actually search through your entire project. So again, right now we only have like 2 real files. We might have hundreds of files. So the search can pick up. So I searched for the word find, and it shows me every occurrence, what line number they're on. So I could go to that line and see, okay, I found this line that has that matching sequence. Maybe that's the line I was looking for. There's a source tree control. So this is associated with Git. You can add some extensions that lets VS Code show some more Git related information. Right now, it's showing me an M here in VS Code. This M says I've modified this file. So again, it's using the Git history to know what the previous version was and that I've modified it. So you can kind of use this to keep track of, you have a visual, instead of using Git status, you can kind of use this to see what you've done. So notice that it's showing me what the previous item was and what I've changed it to. So it looks like I deleted a comment. So that's why it's in red. So this was the original, and this is my modified changes that have not been committed to Git yet. All right, so this panel is really handy to kind of review your changes. If you made a mistake, you can see, oh, I actually didn't mean to change this. Let me copy this, put this back here. And I think I need to tab it. All right, cool. So now I'm kind of restored. So now there should be no modifications if I save that. So notice that that file went away here. So I have no actual modifications. But if I did change something, so let's go back to main.js. Let's say new stuff here. So again, if I save this, I should see that back. Notice there's a 1 here. Yep, that's the change I made. So it highlights exactly what I changed. Nothing else is highlighted because that's all the same. All right, so definitely make use of this panel. Makes it good to kind of see what your Git project is looking like. There's many other Git extensions you can add in, so definitely don't be shy to add more extensions. There's a debug menu. We're going to talk about debugging. This is a skill that all of us developers need to develop and refine. So when you're starting off coding, debugging is probably at the back of your mind. You just want to get things working, but debugging is important, especially again with large projects. You got to be able to find issues efficiently. You don't want to read, if you have 100,000 lines of code, you're not going to read every single line each time something goes wrong. You need to understand how to narrow down your search and figure out exactly what's going wrong. So we'll talk about debugging briefly, use VS Code to kind of see how we can use VS Code's debugger. Okay, let's get to solving this challenge. Again, this challenge is meant to be introductory. The first thing is obviously read the README. So let's go back to, I think I should have multiple tabs here. All right, Quebec Platoon, we got day 1 example. I like reading it in the browser. Just better formatted for me, but there's a README file. Most of your challenges should have a README file, so you could read through it. Let's take a look at what we need to do here. So this is a sample coding challenge. Your objective is to modify the code in main so that all the tests in main.test.js will pass. Important, you should not modify anything in main.test.js in order to get things to work. So it looks like we have a few things we need to implement. We need to implement a function called find first odd, find second odd, find first negative, and find second negative. All right, once you successfully have implemented things correctly, you should be able to use node to run main.test.js and verify that each test passes. So let's quickly do this. Again, it shouldn't take too long. So in VS Code, you can use the integrated terminal. So if you go to the terminal menu at the top and hit new terminal, that's going to bring up a window that is the same thing. Let me make that larger so we can read it or whatever. This is the same terminal that I'm using outside. So, you have iTerm probably that's running outside where you have access to your terminal. You can do things here. So I can, make a file here. So if I wanted to make a file, I could do touch new file.js. Notice I'm in my day one example folder and I touch. So the touch command creates a new file. So if I go back to my VS Code over here, notice that a new file was created. But instead of going to a separate terminal, VS Code has an integrated terminal right here. So I can do the same thing here. Let's say I want to create a new file. I could do touch new file2.js, and that's going to add a new file here. Now, something that, again, a lot of us might struggle with early, and it's something I struggled with, is why are we using the terminal when we could just use the UI here? Now, I kind of do both. I'll be honest. I don't always use a terminal, but the terminal can make things a lot quicker. That's the answer to why we developers use the terminal. It might seem slower at first because you're learning kind of like a new interface, but doing things in a terminal is much quicker most of the time than kind of clicking around on windows, finding menus and whatever else you need to do. So that's why I get comfortable with using a terminal. Don't try to shy away from it.
Hey,
Right.
Thacker, I just want to add on a quick point about that real quick about things in the terminal being faster. If you're just doing something once, it might not be obvious just how much faster it is to use the terminal, but you can really see the benefits if you need to do something 1,000 times, or if you need to do something really reliably. Like if you have a set of 10 steps and you're clicking through the GUI and then you need to do that again next week, you might forget some of those steps. But if you put it all into a script, then those things are going to execute reliably exactly how you wrote them. And also, if you have like a whole folder and you need to apply some logic to every file in that folder, you can write a script that just loops through your folder and does that work to every file. So it's the same amount of effort to do it to 1,000 files as one, whereas in the GUI, you'd be clicking around a lot.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, scripting is something, as Raphael mentioned, if you're doing something repeatedly as a user, write a script for it. Again, that's what developers kind of do for themselves to make tests easier. So again, we can use a terminal to create a file. You can use VS Code. So if you notice in the File Explorer, I want to create a new file here. Again, most of the time, I'll be honest, if I want to create one new file, I'll just do it here and say new file 3, I think I'm on, .js, and then I get another file. So again, many ways to do the same thing. You could do it from an external terminal, which I don't recommend. I recommend if you're in VS Code, just use the integrated terminal that's right there, or you could use some of the UI features in VS Code. All right, let me get rid of my new files because I actually don't want 3 new files. Delete those. All right, so we have this terminal. So most of our work is going to be in VS Code where we edit stuff and then run things through the terminal. All right, so let's actually run our test file because that's eventually what we need to do, get working. So there's a main.test.js file in my day one example. To run it, I need to do node and then the file name. So main.test.js. Node is a program that runs JavaScript. So again, this file right here, this is just the file. It's nothing special. It's just a text file for the most part. But when we pass it to Node, Node is able to interpret this as JavaScript and will do the appropriate thing. We could open, a JS file in a text editor. It's not going to do anything. It just shows us what's in that file. So if I run node and then main.test.js, we should get some output. So we've made no changes right now, and this is what we get from the output. So we have a few tests that we're running. Notice that we are failing pretty much all of our tests. Passed is false for all of these. Our goal here is to get all of these to be true. And the way we get that to be true is, let's take a look at what the test files are checking. So it looks like we're calling a function called find first odd. maybe a function called find first negative. So let's actually try to pass these test cases. So I'm going to actually comment out a lot of these because I just want to focus on them one by one. All right, so our logic, as mentioned, is going to be in main.js. So notice that we have some code coded for you, as in we have the functions that exist, but we actually need to solve these, solve this challenge by actually adding in some logic. So a lot of the challenges, we might have some starter code for you. Some challenges you might have to do from scratch, but a lot of times we're going to have something in place for you where you can kind of get your bearings right. So for find first odd, if you look at the README, it's going to be a function that takes in an array and returns the first value that is odd. Otherwise, you return a string that says not found. All right, should be simple enough to do. So I'm just going to get going here. We take in an array that's already done for us. I'm thinking probably use a for loop. So let's get a for loop going here. I'm going to start at 0. Index 0 is always where we start our arrays. And then we want to go maybe to the length non-inclusive. So again, the last index in our array is going to be array, the length of the array -1. So we don't want to go up to the length. We want to go less than that array. And then we're going to increment our I value. All right, so we need to find an odd value. So let me just code this up, see if we get something working. So to find an odd value, I'm going to create a variable to make this kind of really obvious here. So is odd. I'm going to take my candidate. So that's going to be array at index I. I'm going to mod that by 2. So if I mod it by 2, if there's a remainder, that means it's going to be odd. That's what I'm thinking. Again, I could be wrong here. So testing and trying out things is definitely something I need to do here. But I'm thinking if I take a number, try to divide it by 2 and get the remainder, that's what the mod operator is. If that is equal to 1, if the remainder of this operation is 1, then I know that is odd is going to be true. That's what I'm thinking. I could be wrong here, so we're going to test this out. But if I get something that is odd, I'm going to decide to return that value. That is what the requirements told us to return the value, the first odd value we find in our array. However, if we don't find anything, as in we get through this entire for loop and we never found something that is odd, I'm going to return, I think they told us to return not found. All right, so that's my initial implementation. Again, could be wrong, but I think it looks right to me. So I'm going to give my test case, my test file another run. So let's do up arrow because that's the previous command I just ran, or because there's 2 commands. So I'm going to do, let me actually clear my console so you guys can see this better. So if I do node main.test.js, notice that I'm now passing test1. I got a true, the expected value was 5, and the actual value I got was 5. So let's take a look at our test case again. So this was a sample array. Let's find the first, let's, as humans, find the first odd value. So it's not 8, that's even. -2 is even, 4 is even. Yep, 5 is the first odd number there. So it looks like that worked correctly. But let me actually, knowing with this program, what if I uncomment this line? So this is testing sample array 2, which is a little different. We're calling find first odd. So that's the function that's being called by our test case here. Let's run this. Let's see if we pass both our test cases for find first odd. I'm going to clear that, run this. All right, notice that we still pass our first test case. However, we are not passing the second test case. We got our actual value was not found, but it seems like we should have gotten -1. So let's take a look at our sample array. We have 8, that's even. Sorry, this tooltip keeps popping up. We got 2, that's even, 0, even, even. Yep, -1 is in fact in our array. It is the first odd number. So we should have been able to return it. So let's say I'm not sure why this is going wrong. Like I looking at it, my logic looks right. Well, obviously one part of debugging is just reading your code. But let's say I looked at my code, I'm like, I still don't get it. I don't know what's going wrong. Now, a popular thing we can do is adding some console logs. And I'm not saying this is not improper. Like I do a bunch of console logs all the time where I want to like, let's print out the value of is odd maybe, and print out the value of I. So this is the index, and maybe print out array at I. So let's do console logs. So a lot of debugging can be just done via console log. So I'm going to add that console log in there and then run my test file again. Let's take a look at what my output was for the second test case here. So notice right here is odd is false for a value of 8. So that's true. That's correct, right? 8's even number, so is odd should be false. But keep going. You have these array. But notice it gets down to -1. and I still get a false. So obviously that's not what I expected because -1 should be an odd number. But this is via console log where I'm kind of just printing out the values. I'm going to show you how to use VS Code, just another way you can debug. And again, this is really useful, especially as your projects get more complex, to kind of see actually what's going on in your application step by step. So right here, I don't really see it step by step. I just see the output kind of thrown out together. But if I want to see it as it's going through this code, you can do that from VS Code. So right now we're using our terminal to execute our application. We can run our application through VS Code also. And the way to do that, if you go to the Run menu, so go up to Run menu, go to Start Debugging. So if you go to Start Debugging, it's going to give you a list. It's going to ask you, how do you actually want to run this file? Now, JavaScript can actually run through your browser, and that's something we're going to be doing later on in the cohort. But right now we're going to use Node. Node is a terminal, your terminal-based app. It's not going to use your browser, but I want to use node.js to run this. So if I click that, it's going to use that application. And it's actually going to run my current file, so that's not what I wanted. When I run my main.test.js, so it's going to start debugging Node.js. So notice in my output, I still got the same thing as I did before, but my VS Code actually ran this through the debugger. So the reason that's beneficial is because you can add breakpoints. So if I'm looking at my main.js file, if you hover over the gutter area right here, let me get rid of my file explorer here. If you hover over here, you can add a breakpoint. So see this red dot that's kind of following my mouse cursor? Let's say I want to investigate the value of is odd. I can put a breakpoint right here. Now it becomes bright red. This is going to actually stop my execution of my application when it gets to this line. Because I'm telling it, I want to stop right here and investigate what's going on in my application. All right, so with this breakpoint in place, I could go back to start debugging. Sorry, I keep scrolling that up. I want to run this file because this is my main file. Start debugging, the test file. And notice that it hit the breakpoint in main.js because main.test.js, I guess maybe I should explain this. We're using the contents of main.js in our test file. So that's why we're running the stuff that's in our main file here. So notice that my breakpoint got hit. So I have this yellow highlighted line. I got this pentagon looking thing in the gutter. That means my application is not running right now. It's actually paused on this line. So some things that are of our interest that VS Code offers is you can actually check out the values of certain variables in this panel right here. So notice there's a variables panel, and then it's showing me the value of is odd right now. So right now it's undefined because it's creating this variable here and going to assign it a value. So if you find your kind of run menu, which can kind of hover anywhere, you can move it around the top. If you hit this arrow button, it's going to go to the next line. Actually, let's go to this step over. This is actually going to proceed to take it to the next line. So if I click this, notice that my value of is odd just updated. Notice it's showing me that the value of is odd is false right now. I can investigate other things like hover your mouse over the value of I. Notice it tells me the current value of I. Can you guys see my tooltips? I'm not sure if that enters. Yes, tooltips?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, so you can see the current value of I, if I want to see what the value of array is, just hover over it. It shows me every content, every index value. So notice index 4 is 0, index 1 is -2. But this is my first test case that's running. It's called this function and it passes in this array. That's what this test function is doing. But I know that one passes it. So, I can maybe put a breakpoint down here and get rid of my breakpoint here because I don't want to keep running this. If I keep, hitting the play button, which means continue on, it's going to keep hitting this breakpoint because I'm in a for loop. So every iteration here, it's going to keep hitting that breakpoint. That's not what I want to do here. I want to actually get to this breakpoint. I guess I got through my list, but now I hit this breakpoint so I could continue on. And now in my second array. So if I look at array, this is my 8, 2, 0, -4, -1. So again, I want this -1 should return true from this function, right? Because -1 is an odd number. So let's kind of continue here. All right, we're on index value 0, right? I don't want to be at index value 0. I want to wait till index value is 4. So I can just kind of continue here. See, I is 2. Yep, so you see your I value right here. Notice it's by block level. So I have my array listed here, my I values. If I continue one more time, notice my I value now is 4. So this is actually the iteration I want to check because again, our array, our 4th index, which is -1, should return true for is odd, right? So if I step one more time, I can check the value and yep, is odd is still false. That is not what I expected. So this, as a developer, I'm like, well, something's going wrong here. I know that I wanted this to return true because -1 is odd. Now what's going on here? Now, at this point, I could stop my code here if I want to make some modifications. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's say I want to get the result of this piece. So let's do let's remainder equals this operation. And then I'm going to use the remainder here just to get, some more intermediate steps here. So again, I'm going to get the result of this operation, sort of remainder, and then see what remainder is. So remainder should be 1 for me to see that it's odd. So let me take away my breakpoints. I'm going to keep my breakpoint in my test file here. And I'm going to run this again through my debugger. So go back to run, debugger. All right, so notice I hit my breakpoint for my second test. It totally skipped over the first test because it ran that. I got my output right here, right? Test case 1 passed. That's what I was getting before. But now that I hit my breakpoint here, you can do, again, there's a few options here. Step into means it's actually going to go into that function. So notice I'm calling test my function here. If I actually hit step into, let's see where it takes me. Notice it took me actually into my test my function because that's a function call right here. Step into goes into that function call. Step over would go to the next line here. So if you want to dig deeper, you want to step into, which is this option right here, or F11. F11 is a shortcut. All right, so if I want to go in here, notice it's calling another function here. So I want to step into that. So I'm going to click this again right here. And now it actually takes me to the function that's being called here, which is in main.js. All right, so that's obviously where I wanted to get to. I'm going to add a breakpoint here and kind of continue on. All right, let's check out my I value right here. Let me collapse a few of these panels. All right, so my I value is 0. I want to get to be 4 because 4 is my item of interest right here. So if I continue on, notice that remainder is 0 for all the even values, right? I2, I3. All right, when we get to I4, notice what we get here. It looks like remainder is -1. That is not what I expected, right? I thought anything with the remainder of +1 is an odd number. But it looks like for negative numbers, if you do a module operation, so this is some negative number, in this case, looks like it's -1 modded by 2. The result of that is -1, not +1. Right, so I think I've identified my problem here. Looking at my debugger, I got -1, but I wanted to get 1. So it looks like my logic right here is incorrect. I can't always check against 1 because we might get a negative number that's going to give us -1. So again, I think I've identified my problem. I got a -1, but I was not expecting that. How can I fix this? Well, I'm thinking a quick way, I can just do math.abs, which is absolute value. And now maybe any value I get, whether positive, -1, I'm going to compare that to +1. So absolute value should give me a positive value. All right, let's see if that works. So I'm going to go back to my terminal because I think that probably was fixed. So if I do node main.test.js. All right, cool, I'm passing that test case. All right, any questions about using the debugger? Again, breakpoints are the main name of the game. There's more advanced things you can do. You can set conditional breakpoints. I'm not going to get into that right now because it's probably not worth the effort. But again, you could configure your breakpoints to hit only when a certain condition is true. That is possible. All right, so that's a quick demo of how you can debug using VS Code. Again, it's going to be much more beneficial when you have a lot of wheels turning right now. Again, this is a very simple, algorithm, if we can even call it that. But when you have like large projects with tons of files, I really enjoy using debugger. There's command line debuggers that exist, so that is something that exists if you want to actually use a terminal for debugging. But I think VS Code is really one of the reasons it's really great is because it has a nice UI. It makes it really easy to kind of step through your application. Any questions on what I've done here? All right, so again, just get familiar with VS Code. So again, we talked about the file explorer, just shows you all your files in your workspace. We talked about extensions tab where you could add a whole list of extensions, discover new ones. I'm sure you could find some really cool ones just by Googling or just even just typing random words here. And we talked about the source control tab. Again, this shows me everything I've modified. So it looks like I've modified my main.test.js. Per the requirements, we were not supposed to modify this. Obviously, I just commented them out. So, you know, if I want to restore it, I should be able to just kind of match it up. And it should take away all those modifications. Cool. So now I'm back to where I was before. Notice it's not highlighting anything. So if I save this, main.test.js should go away because I only meant to modify my main.js file. And it shows me the changes here. All right, let's say I'm completed with this challenge. Obviously, I have a few more to go, but I'm not going to go through them because I'm sure you guys can solve it yourself or totally ignore it because this is not a real challenge. But let's say I've actually completed my challenge and I'm ready to commit this. This is going to go over the stuff that Raphael went over just shortly ago. I'm going to do a git add period. It's going to add all my changes that I've made. In this case, I've only modified one file. If I had like 20 files that I modified, git add period is going to add all of those changes to your Git project. Now, just to reiterate, saving something and adding it to your Git project are totally different things. When you save a file, that's saving it in on your local directory, whatever modifications you made. The git add actually adds the changed file to your Git project. So you know how Git is trying to manage your files, trying to spy on what's changed, what's different. Git add tells it to actually commit, or not commit, but add it to like the staging area. If I do a git commit now, -m, you want to add a good comment to kind of describe what changed. Because if you need to go back in time, let's say, you know, a month from now, I want to come back to this project and see what, you know, what I changed. Let's say solved find first odd function, or maybe implemented. But always good to put informative messages here. So implemented find first odds function. We didn't complete everything, that's okay. Okay, so notice it tells me, all right, one file change. That makes sense because I'm only modified one file. It tells me I added 9 lines. This is probably 9 lines worth of stuff. I deleted 2 lines. That's probably the comment that I deleted. All right, cool. Assuming that that's cool, I'm going to do a Git Push Origin. So again, this will actually transfer it from my computer back to my GitHub. So I'm actually saving it in the cloud, if you will, so that now, let's say my computer totally crashes, I have a copy online in my GitHub. So I'm going to hit enter. It's going to do some stuff, and everything looks like it went okay. So now if I go to my GitHub, day 1 challenge, not Quebec Platoon, but the personal GitHub. See if I can find it. Hopefully I did the right one. Okay, notice it has a timestamp. 1 minute ago, I submitted this. So that makes sense because I just committed this. I can take a look at main.js. Yep, these are the changes I added. Assuming I'm good, like I completed everything. There's one more step that we're going to ask you guys to do for your challenges. So in your personal GitHub, when you're on the challenge, there should be a pull request tab right here. Right, I'm going to click that pull request. Should take me something like this. I'm going to click new pull request. What we're essentially doing here is we're going to kind of submit a copy to Quebec Platoon. So we're going to hit new pull request. It's going to show me the changes from my personal GitHub. I'm going to do create pull request. I'm going to give it a title here. So when you guys are submitting, again, this is how you're quote unquote submitting your application. Please put your name in the title just so it's easy for us to identify it. I mean, we could look at your GitHub handle, but we don't have those all memorized and say who's who. So here, I might do like Encore's solution, and then it has a comment. That's fine. So I'm going to do, let me see for that, say Encore solution for day 1 example. All right, so again, put your name in the title and then hit create pull request. So that's going to do something for a couple seconds. Just going to check for a few things. All right, so once you get the green check mark, that means you have officially submitted it to us, meaning we can review it. We can see that you actually completed a challenge. If we go back to Quebec Platoon, there should be a pull request tab. And notice I have, looks like Ivan has also submitted his solution. So here's mine, here's Ivan's. We should see all of your submissions here when you guys are done with your challenges. This is a way for us to track your progress and see who's completing challenges. Also, if I want to see Ivan's solution, I could go in here, go to his GitHub. Let's take a look at his main.js. Yep, so notice this is his solution. He uses single quotes, I use double quotes. Either is fine. But again, we can kind of see how you guys are solving these challenges and give you feedback if there's anything that we notice. All right, so that is the process of going from forking over a challenge, cloning it down to your machine, making the necessary changes to solve that particular challenge, then doing a git add, git commits with a nice comment, and a git push. That will push it back to your GitHub. And the final step, don't forget, is to do a pull request. So from your personal GitHub, you want to go to pull request, do a new pull request, and submit it so that we could actually see that you submitted it. Any questions on that process? Oh, we got another one. Looks like Grant has submitted his. Glad you guys were playing along at home. Okay, so again, VS Code, get comfortable with it. If you have any questions, again, we're not going to do too much with it. VS Code has a lot of capabilities. One thing that I like using are something called snippets, where if you're writing the same code over and over again, you can create a code snippet so that it automatically creates inserted code for you. Like I have a snippet for an HTML file. So I get, create my index.html. There's some pre-configured snippets. So if you hit exclamation mark in an HTML file, hit enter, it's going to give you like a bare bones HTML file for you. I did not just type this magically right now. VS Code automatically enter that in for me. You can create your own snippets. So actually I created one called HTML base, hit enter, and this is my basic HTML page where I can add on to it now, add whatever I want. So snippets are really cool. Again, that's just one of many features for VS Code. I'm sure you guys will discover new ones as you're developing with VS Code. Any questions on, again, setting up extensions, using the debugger, using the integrated terminal? Definitely want to make sure you guys are comfortable with VS Code.
I had a question about debugging.
Sure.
The example you used, everything was like the arrays were hard coded in. And in the past, when I've tried to use certain debuggers, when it requires input from a user, it is where I start to have problems. Does this incorporate that nicely? Like in the terminal there, does it run and like stop and prompt you for input at the appropriate areas and then continue to run and go to breakpoints and stuff like that? Or is it a lot more involved when it comes to like getting input from people?
No, getting input. So with Node, it's a little tricky. This is specific to Node. If we're coding in Python right now, I could just do it in 2 seconds. Python has a built-in input mechanism where, if I wanted to get the user's name, they could type in their name like here, and then Python will take that in. With Node, it is possible, but you got to actually install a library. It seems it's way harder than it should be. But I think for your challenge tonight, you won't have to use Node. I think we might have changed it to use your browser, which has an input mechanism. But to answer your question, no, the debugger will work fine. So when we were debugging it, you have the option to continue, as in it's going to run the rest of your application until it hits another breakpoint. So if I had like a line right here after my breakpoint that said, get username and add some input mechanism, again, this isn't valid code. But if this was like the point where it asks the user for a name, it's actually going to do that in the terminal. So you can still interact with your application. It's not like hands off or off limits. What other questions do you guys have about VS Code or anything else we went over today? Okay, last thing I want to show you, just get more familiar with our curriculum. We'll probably talk more about it tomorrow. If you go back to the curriculum project, there's a nice README down here that has some information that we went over and probably some information that we will go over. There's a nice diagram here. We might have shown this off during the pre-work call, but these are all the pieces we're going to be learning throughout the cohort. So we're going to be learning Python soon enough, SQL, HTML, JavaScript. We're going to be doing something called Django framework, React. We're going to kind of combine all these pieces together to what we call full stack development, where you're able to create an application from start to finish using all the tools that we're going to go over the next 10 weeks. There's a curriculum calendar. I think we need to update this. So this link might be for the previous cohort, but this should show a summary of every single day, what we're going to go over. So it's a nice summarized view. Student handbook, again, all useful links here. So if you want to review the student handbook, You can click this tab, it should take you to some document here. So you go through this again. This goes over, deadlines, policies, academic things might need to be updated there too. Slack etiquette, I think we went over this, but just go over Slack etiquette one more time. Where's my Slack window? It's here, I promise. Did I go to Quebec? All right, here's my Slack window. We might have gone over this in the pre-work call, but I want to make sure we're all understanding how we intend to use Slack. So we have our Quebec channel. Raphael wrote a message here. If I'm responding to his message, usually just respond in the thread. Instead of writing a message here, I'm responding here. This is going to create a new message here, and it's going to kind of clutter up, this chat, especially if we have like 40 plus people kind of chatting about different things. So if I were to respond to Raphael, I would say, oh, cool. I'll do that. So now I responded in the thread. So notice it shows that I replied with something. If anyone actually wanted to see what I replied with, they could check it out. But in this main view, it's not going to clutter up the UI as much. So make sure you're responding in thread if it makes sense to. If it's a one-on-one chat, yeah, you don't know how to use threads. It's just like a chat room at that point. So use threads. You can use reactions. Slack etiquette, as Raphael mentioned, try not to use like at here or at channel unless you really need to kind of notify everyone, because these are kind of noisy that notifies everyone, sends special notifications. So for the most part, you won't be using these kind of special channel notifications, but they do exist in Slack.
Hey, while we're on the subject of Slack etiquette, there's just one thing I want to add real quick. If you're trying to share code with someone over Slack, it can be hard sometimes because the formatting gets messed up when you copy and paste it. So one thing you can do is type in a triple backtick in Slack. That's the key just above your tab. Looks kind of like that. Just put it in chat. And then anything you type inside of that gets formatted like code. It uses a monospace font and it preserves the tabs and indentations. So in that block of text that I posted in the chat there with the questions, that was in the triple backticks. Okay, yeah, Ankur's giving you a better example here. So yeah, that's much easier to read. You'll find it, other people will have a much easier time helping you if you post your code in a way that's easy to read.
Yep, yeah, so try to use some formatting options. Again, not end of the day if you don't, but just get used to it because that's kind of what we do here. I'm going to delete my message. Talk about deleting messages. So please try not to delete your message unless like it's really a mistake. Even if it's like a question, you're like, oh, I figured out the answer. Still have it in there just to have a history. Again, we're not going to come yell at you if you delete messages, but it kind of gets confusing with like if I see a message and then it disappears, I meant to respond to it. So I'm going to delete mine because I didn't want my code there. But normally speaking, you shouldn't really need to delete messages unless it truly was a mistake or like you wrote it in the wrong chat and you don't want it there anymore. All right, Slack etiquette. Most of you guys should be fine with it. Again, there are formatting options, so make sure you use that just to make code a little easier to read. All right, so I got on this tangent because I was going through the curriculum page. So Slack etiquette, give that a read. Formatting mentioned here. This is the stuff that Raphael went over. So if you need, if you forget, wouldn't blame you because it's a lot of steps. This goes over everything you need to do to check out a challenge. So it talks about forking, cloning down. So you place repo link with the actual repository link that you're cloning down. Make whatever changes you want, do a git add, commits. Again, everything we went over today is documented here on the curriculum page. So there's a README for the curriculum. That's what we're looking at right now. So if you forget, do that. We talked about daily check-ins. I think this forum probably needs to be updating. So we'll be doing this tomorrow morning. We'll go over it, promise. But if you ever forget the daily check-in forum, this is one way to access it. Things you can do if you finish early. So sometimes you might be a go-getter and finish all your challenges. You could call it a day, but that's not going to lead to success later on. So always make use of your time. If you have extra stuff to do, Code Wars, great site, highly recommended to practice your coding. Because that's with anything. If I want to become the next greatest basketball player, I'm going to need to practice my dribbling and shooting and everything else every single day. It's not just like a one-day thing and you get better at it. It's a process. So Code Wars has a lot of examples and coding challenges you go through. I've not used Pramp or Interview Cake, but we'll check out Interview Cake quickly because it's been linked. All right, if you want to get better at interviews, take a look at Interview Cake. Again, I've not looked at this too much, so I might need to brush up on it. But again, some links there. our YouTube. So if you click on this link, it should take you to our YouTube channel. This is where you can find playlists of everything from this cohort, but also from past cohorts. And this is a great resource. So sometimes, hey, if you're trying to get ahead, you can look at a past cohort and see like week 2, what do we cover in week 2? Check that out. So if I go to playlists, scroll down, Pop-Up Platoon was our previous cohort. So if I want to see what happened in week 2, find Pop-Up Platoon week 2. And then we have a playlist of everything from that week. So it should be all 5 days listed here. Yeah, if you want to just see what we went over last cohort, you're welcome to. Again, there's tons of videos here going back like 3, 4, 5 cohorts. So definitely use them if you want to. If you miss a day of class, we will be uploading the current day's lecture, usually over lunch, because lecture should finish up before lunch most days. They'll be uploaded. It takes a while to upload, so probably like an hour after we finish lecture, they'll be uploaded fully to YouTube. But there will be directories here for Quebec Platoon per week. So we'll create a week 1 directory, and it'll have Raphael's lecture from this morning. I'll add my VS Code lecture. And then again, if you missed it or just forgot something, want to have a good review, you should be able to get any video resource on this channel. So again, that you can find that link from the curriculum page, or you could just honestly go to YouTube, go to youtube.com, and then I want to type in Code Platoon. Yep, Code Platoon, there's a channel, and boom, you're right where you are. There's other videos. Check out some alumni stories. Discover the site. Plenty of videos to go watch. Any questions on accessing our Code Platoon YouTube or anything else about anything at all? That's kind of broad. Student resources, I guess, complete this page. These are resources that other students have kind of compiled here. It's not super extensive, but again, as we're going to like week 4, if you're getting acquainted with Django, check out some of these YouTube links. These are what other students have recommended. We have not necessarily vetted them, but again, some people found css-schematic.com. If you want to fiddle around with box shadows, great. Jack Schuff has left you a resource that he found was beneficial. Highly recommend if you guys find a cool resource, just add it on to the student resources page. That's going to benefit people in the next cohort and even people in this cohort. All right, that's a lot to go through, but again, a lot of useful links on the curriculum page. So if you ever get lost, you can probably find your way through this page. All right, with that, I'm going to stop the recording.